We have roll call, please.
Yes. Committee Chair Maxey,
Present.
Commissioner Dopplemore,
Present.
Commissioner Day,
Present.
Commissioner Geog,
Present.
Commissioner No,
Here.
Commissioner O'Brien. Absent. You have a quorum of the DRSP committee.
Thank you. Item number 2 on our agenda is public comment on items that are not on the agenda. Are there any public comments? Saying none, we will move on to the committee chair's report. For my report is just happy fall to everyone, although it feels like we're in midsummer in Las Vegas here. But thank you to the staff for setting up all of this for us, and especially the skirts. I love the skirts.
Yeah.
Last meeting, we didn't have that. I missed that. But very comfortable here in our new locations. And we can move on to the approval, which is item number 4 of the Data Research and Strategic Planning Committee minutes from June. I assume that our committee has had an opportunity to look at that. So are there any corrections or additions to our minutes from June 22nd? If not, a motion to approve our minutes? I'll move. Thank you. A second, please.
Second.
Thank you. The moved and seconded that we accept our minutes from June 22nd, 2022. Our first informational item is, oh, I need to vote.
Roll call.
Roll call, please.
Commissioner Day,
Aye.
Commissioner Dopplemore,
Sustained.
Commissioner Geog,
Aye.
Commissioner No,
Aye.
Ryan, absent. And Committee Chair Maxey.
Aye.
Motion carries.
Thank you. And now we'll move on to item number 5, which is an update on the September 2nd FAFSA and CADA submissions. This is informational, presented by Patrick Perry and Ryan Fuller.
Okay, thank you, Chair Maxey, members of the subcommittee. Good afternoon. This is our frequent update on FAFSA CADA submissions within the various cycles that we're in. We're nearing the very tail end of the last cycle, and so I'm going to let Ryan Fuller fill you in. We'll have one more update on this cycle after we get kind of October the 1st. So this is a very late update of where we are at. In this particular 21 cycle. Anyway, Ryan.
Thanks, Patrick. So here's where we are. All these numbers that you're seeing are as of last Wednesday, the 31st. We updated all of our trend line data, and so you can see overall, probably not surprising, we're still down for all students. We're down about 4.6%. For all undergrads, we're down around 4%. So that it's just kind of continuing a trend we saw earlier in the year, although if you remember, that number was a little bit higher and when we were earlier in the cycle. And I'll get into what's kind of feeding that there. GreenAct applications are down. We're down about 9% for those students. But the silver lining here, and this is what we've been seeing this since the beginning of summer, is we're seeing first-time undergrads increasing. It's modest, it's about 3%, but it's a positive sign. It's something we haven't seen in several years now. So it's, I'll dig into the numbers a little bit on those first-time undergrads, so you can see kind of how that's panning out at the college and segment level. But it's a positive sign. We continue to see growth. That number keeps going up as we enter the end of this cycle. And we're hopeful that we'll see this number continue to increase as we start the new cycle in October. I'm hopeful that that will continue to be the case. Just a little snapshot of the applications by age. You can see that under 17 and under, that's high school students applying, and that's primarily the driver here in the growth we're seeing. But those other groups, these are mainly returning students, 18, and especially in those categories of 20 to 29. We're seeing those numbers decline. A lot of these are students that, they may have been expected them to return, or we're just not seeing those numbers where they were in past years. Because the first time group was down in prior years, we're also seeing a smaller cohort of students just moving through. So, I wouldn't be surprised to see some of those age 20 to 29 numbers maybe be flat or decline early into the year. But we'll see where that goes, and we'll continue to track the age categories for these undergraduate applications. And so the first time undergrad breakdown, this is pretty interesting. We're seeing significant growth at UC and community colleges. We're up quite a bit for those two segments, a little over 11% for the community college system and about 8% for UC. CSU is fairly flat. It's actually down a little bit, about 400 applications from where we were this time last year. And then we're seeing some actual declines for the first time undergrad population among the for-profits and private independents. So it's kind of a nuanced story here. We're seeing really the growth is happening really at the public segments, while at the same time being fairly flat at CSU. So we'll see where this trend goes when we turn over the new cycle in October. Just in summary, undergrad applications continue to be down on the whole. Dream Act continues to be down on the whole, but we're seeing that little bit of good news that the first time undergrads applications are up, with the caveat that it's UC and the community colleges and fairly flat at CSU, but actual declines at the for-profits and independents. So the next update will finish off on this application cycle year, and we'll have actually a snapshot of the first several months of the new cycle. So we'll see kind of where we land at that point in early December. Any questions?
So the leading indicator of we're getting out of the trough is now showing up there. Right? It's not uncommon to think that you have consecutive years of smaller first-time applicants that and enrollment was down pretty much across the board everywhere, especially in the colleges, to see smaller cohorts of returning. If that continued with first time, then we got a problem. Here's the first time we're seeing, okay, we're starting to get our students back. They're starting to fill out FAFSA. It's high schoolers, they're young. We were, as far as percentage of the high school class building out of FAFSA, senior class, at one point we were at a high of almost 60% of the high school seniors in the state building out of FAFSA. During the worst year of COVID, it was down to about 51, 52% of high school seniors. I think we're back up to 56, 57. And now, we're starting the initiative of all high school seniors in the FAFSA. So this is good. I'm taking this as good news. They will then repopulate the returning student pools, and over the course of 4 or 5 years, hopefully all these numbers will start to go back up. So the leading indicator is not that.
Okay, yes.
Question about Dream Act. Are we seeing differences across the systems with regard to that decline?
I mean, there's declines across all of the system. We could look at it by first time. I didn't look at that piece just for the first time students to see if there's a difference there, but the declines are pretty uniform.
Dream Act by segment.
So Dream Act by segment, yeah.
Well, we can look at it specifically.
Yeah, I don't want to think of a project.
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to know.
No,
And
I think it's still down.
Yeah. That's
unfortunate.
It is unfortunate. Very concerning.
I looked at the data, not by system, but just across the board, and it just has not recovered since the last federal administration. That's when you saw the significant decline, and it just has not crept up to Trump administration numbers. That's what it tracks with. I have a question. So this is a question. Anecdotally, I know a lot of families whose first-time freshman children got accepted to a CSU, mostly CSU, could be UCs as well. But their kids just felt like they wanted to stay closer to home, so they ended up enrolling in the community college as opposed to going to the four-year. During the pandemic, these are the kids that really had the bulk of their high school experience remotely. And do you think that is more a trend behind why there's an uptick in community college freshmen and a downturn in CSU freshmen? Or is that just too anecdotal? I've just heard that a lot.
Yeah, so the distribution you're seeing on here, we're taking where they're stating as their first selection of where to send it. It doesn't mean where they went. Okay, it's where they're applying to or where they think they're going. So, I mean, you still got a certain population in this case that are saying, I'm just going to community college, right? UC remains a highly popular place to apply to, doesn't necessarily mean that's where they went. We don't know. So, until we actually do a data match with all these folks to see what was the difference between what was their first selection to send the passing information to them, where they actually enrolled in, I don't know whether it's anecdotal or not.
Are there other questions or comments on this particular topic? I'm looking at the screen here. Oh, that was moved. Okay. No other comments on this? We did a fantastic job of bringing us up to date.
I'm really looking forward to see what happens in October.
Yes.
Me too.
I'm definitely looking forward to that, being at the high school level, and thank you, Patrick, publicly, and Ryan for getting me the information that I had requested, as I'm pushing for that to see if this, with this new mandate law, AB 469, how that will help us out all across the board. Trying to make believers out of people that think that we're doing it and we're not. So I use the data just so everyone knows. I had asked for a little more clarification and teasing out of some information because I'm working in San Diego area with the mayor as well as the superintendent of schools to promote how we can come together as a whole city and really push AB 469 and not just let an opt-out be the way the students go. And so it has taken me 2 months of meetings, Zoom, and they kept saying, oh, we already do that, the counselors do that, and I kept saying, no, they don't. Being a former counselor is not just the counselor's responsibility, so I finally got a call from the deputy superintendent of San Diego Unified. She's home with COVID, but she said, I have to call you because I keep seeing all of your emails, and I know that you're not going away, and you've called everybody that you know. I said, yeah, these people I don't know, saying that we need to do something different to put San Diego on the map. We're a very large district there. And so really wanting to have all hands on deck and not just putting it off on counselors. Because you tell principals, this is what has to happen. They run down the hall to the counseling office and say, this is what we have to do. And it's all of us together, because that's what it's titled, isn't it? Financial aid for all. So that's what we're doing. So hopefully we'll see. October starts that. And then we started beating the drums. It's coming, it's coming, it's coming. And then when we start, hopefully we'll see up and down the state that we're making some moves in a positive manner. Any other concerns, questions, comments on this item? Yes.
I would just say this is incredibly important. I hope that we continue to look at this over time. It's very helpful having this data and being able to understand it across the state. It is so I actually think I would recommend that as a semi-standing item that we be understanding. It's because it's an indicator of so many things. So I appreciate it being there. I appreciate the work that goes into delivering this.
Thank you. Just, I wanted to add to that too. On the Csac website on the Csac data mart, you've got all of this, it's updated weekly. It's cut by segment, it's cut by what demography we have, it's cut by individual college campus, and it's cut by individual high school. So you can really get in there and go and see where you're at.
Yeah, we just have to get to the website.
Yeah, I think it's cut by count too, isn't it?
Yeah, counting for.
Yeah.
Demographics.
Yep.
Is that the DART, the link that's on here? Or is that something separate?
csac.ca.gov/data.
Yes.
Thank you. Patrick, when we're looking at the data, you said that you're looking at the campus or institution that the student lists first. And we saw student applying to UC first, we would see them in the UC number. If they had CSU second, would we see that in the CSU section?
No, right now, we're just picking the first listed. So, basically, for returning students, what you're showing is probably where they're already enrolled. For a high school student, you're showing, well, here's my highest, intent aspiration, right? And I do believe that since UC and CSU went away from SAT, ACT requirements, I think the volume of applicants to UC aspirations build up, look at their volume. I mean, CSU still is getting plenty. And they're still getting plenty of enrollment. Yeah.
Other comments? Commission, if you have another, you just reading.
Well, I mean, with that comment, I'm sorry, I just had a brain flash. Is because also with this class is where we had a reduction, we had an increase with more eligible students that were able to apply to the UC system because we reduced and limited the number of out-of-state applicants. So I'm just saying, like, with those numbers, could that can also be a factor with tying into not just with the seeing a bump with community college, but also with a bump for like UCs as well. I wonder if that's also another factor to consider.
Sure.
So that's all. I just like, it was just a brain, just an
Aha.
aha moment, something else to take into consideration as well. That's all.
Others? I see nothing on the screen. Okay, so thank you so much for this update, Patrick, as well as Ryan, and we can move on to, that was informational. We'll move on to the next informational item, which is an update on the student expenses and resource survey, SEERS expense budget.
Okay. There, let's see. There we go. Okay. So this is an update on the SEERS survey, Student Expenses and Resources Survey. I've given previous updates on how the process of SEERS has gone on. We're now giving you the update on it is completed, and we have numbers, and we have some data nuggets. We have some qualitative things that we wanted to share with you. We're still mining this data and information. Okay. Once again, quick overview and background. Why do we do SEERS? It's a survey we do once every 3 years. It is to a random sample of all students in all segments. We have a statutory mandate to collect and disseminate information concerning the financial resources and needs of students. SEERS is used to establish our student expense budget, which we update once every 3 years, and in the other 2 years in between, we just apply COLA to inflate the numbers ever so slightly, but once every 3 years we get new data and we reset all of these data points. We develop a report on student expenses, on how students are paying for college and how much they pay for individual aspects of their budgets. And then we also provide a backup to the segment offices and to campuses so that they can do other things with it as well. Okay, the last time we did Sears prior to this was in 2019. 3 years later, 2022, we completed the 4-year sector in the fall. We completed the 2-year sector here in the spring of 22. Our goal this time was to improve the number of responses, and we did that. The last time we did this, we had 18,000 responses. This year, we had almost 24,000 responses. Not all responses are completely complete, so we only use the ones where they have responded to all of the necessary items. In this case, that was about 17,000 usable responses. They are then statistically weighted to get them back to population means and norms for the entire student population so that they're not skewed. You can see the response rates by segments. Obviously, we send out many more surveys electronically to community college students, but they have a lower response rate, but they still get a pretty high number. So 3% response rates for community colleges. UC was 8, CSU 10, and then privates and independents 13% response rate. Not bad. 17,000 survey responses gets you a pretty good number. Okay, let me walk you through this and hopefully you can see. In general, if you were to just go to the bottom line there where it says difference, here's your bottom line change between the 22-23 and the 23-24. The survey we just finished becomes the 23-24 student expense budget. The 22-23 student expense budget is the data from the 18-19 survey plus 2 years of COLA and inflation tacked onto it. All right. So we're resetting new numbers. So just if we break it up with where they live with parents, live on campus, live off campus. So for instance, here we'll start with living with parents, and this is across all students, across all segments. The cost of food went from $10.40 to $11.90 for living with parents. Okay, off campus, it went from $6.37 to $7.19. You can see the deltas there if you just read across in each of those columns. You can see in general, inflation took its toll, increases in cost. The 18-19 survey was pre-COVID. Current survey definitely in COVID and also during the period of price inflation, right? And you can see the bottom line there on difference. Living with parents up 12% in total overall costs. Living on campus up 16%. Living off campus up 14%. Okay. You can see the individual components there. Transportation has a star on it because we added a new expense there. So some of the increase there is because we started asking students to include the cost of travel to and from the permanent residence, not necessarily the cost of to and from where you're staying for school and school. Okay. So like if you're living on campus, we want you to add any costs of going home for holidays and things like that as your transportation costs. So some of those went up. Housing, living off campus housing went from $13.39 to $15.29 per month. You can see some of the other costs trickled up. Transportation costs certainly went up. Other personal costs certainly went up. The one item that did not go up, I've separated it completely on the bottom, and these are annual costs, and those are the costs of books and supplies and textbooks, which went down. We'll talk about that in a minute. Everything else went up. So you can see your monthly costs. You can see, what happened over the course of the last year. Not unexpected, nothing earth-shattering. We anticipated these things. We just didn't know what was going to be the actual rate of inflation. And honestly, this tracks pretty well with the current rate of inflation over the course of the last year. All right. Textbooks is the most notable thing that went down. So here's the sliver of good news here. Cost of textbooks went down 20% from the last time we did the survey, which was pre-COVID. So in speaking with people who know about, why would the cost of textbooks go down on campus for students? It's a number of things. You can't point to any one thing. One, there's been a lot of OER initiatives, try and get the cost of textbooks down, to try and, digitize materials to get them in use. State has funded a lot of that. Students have become more savvy about, I'm not going to go in and buy the $250 textbook. I'm going to rent it digitally, or I'm going to rent certain chapters. So they themselves, or I'm not going to buy it at the campus. Trying to find a third party online or used. Students are becoming more discerning shoppers, but the faculty play a role in this as well. Faculty that themselves have a greater cognition of book costs and are trying to keep those costs down. And from the natural move to more distance ed, from when we did the survey previously, pre-COVID, suddenly for a while, everything was online, and now a much greater percentage of total classes are online than I think where we were 3 years ago. Online classes just generally seem to have more digital material put in them than go in and buy a $250 textbook. Right, so I think the natural progression of that to more distance ed modality has cut down on costs. So I think we've got a lot of things that we can point to with our successes. What is textbook cost? Okay, drilling into some of this, and these are, not metrics of costs, but other things that we can glean from Cedars, and also now look at the changes between the way things were 3 years ago and the way things are now. Students across the board who are younger, less than age 21. Last time we did this survey, 75% of them lived on campus or with their parents. That number is now 78%. So more students living on campus, living at home. Some of this is probably cost. Some of this may be that campuses are building more housing to accommodate them. You see the CSU are trying hard, and in colleges, some places are building housing. Hispanic and Latino students live disproportionately with their parents. You can see the differences there. In the green part of the bar, 57% living with parents, all students 49%.
The dads are almost go.
Also looking at where do students live, some of the changes that we saw that stuck out a little bit. The percentage of CSU students living with parents went from 47% in 19 to 55% in 22. So there's more students at CSU living at home. And in the independent colleges and universities, some pretty big migrations there. Percentage of students at independent colleges and universities living on campus went down from 42% to 29%. And the percentage of independent college and university students living with parents went up dramatically from 14% to 31%. Smaller numbers here, but that's a pretty big shift.
Is this still for students under 21?
This is for everybody. For everybody. Be interested to talk to IQ about that and see if they know anything about that. But that was a pretty significant number. I cannot explain it, but it's significant. Also, Ryan found this little nugget open through there, what we call roommate density. So this is only for students who live off campus, right? You think, oh, the poor community college students, they must be jam-packing themselves. Actually not. Over 60% of community college students who live off campus have 0 or 1 roommates. UC students, however, live in extremely dense conditions if they live off campus, perhaps pointing to off-campus housing shortages surrounding UC service areas. But 50% of UC students who live off campus live in situations where they have 3 or more roommates. 4 people live in some. Right? That's dense. And no other segment had that.
I'm surprised CSU didn't, because 10 of them live next door to me. And 7 on the other.
Anecdotal evidence. Yeah, density of off-campus living.
I'll make a phone call when I get back.
Okay. Also separate from just straight up, tell us how much it costs. We asked some questions about their perceptions, and this is kind of the alpha question that we ask students on their perception of their own feelings about their ability to cover costs. Please answer the question whether you agree or disagree. I have enough resources to cover the following expenses. And this is just to gauge, where students are at. 37% of students did not agree with the statement that they have enough money to cover tuition and fees. 29% of students did not agree with the statement, I have enough resources to cover housing and utilities. And that's a third, right? It's interesting that they say that they disagree more with being able to pay tuition and fees, right, rather than housing. But these are two of the big categories, obviously, the two big ticket items. They're down 1% from the 2019 survey. So it actually got incrementally slightly smaller. Maybe that's good, or maybe that's statistically not really significant, but it's still a pretty good chunk of students feeling that they just don't have enough money. This one comes up all the time. There's geographic differences, especially in the cost of where do you live in California and what's the cost of housing. These are the two opposite poles for where colleges are. Students who are going to colleges in Fresno and Merced counties average about $800 a month paying for housing. If you live in the peninsula or mid-peninsula in San Francisco and San Mateo counties, the other end of the spectrum, you're paying $1,300 a month, with probably a higher density of living too. But between low and high in California, it's an extra $500 a month to pay for your rent or housing costs. We separated them out and looked at differences by younger versus older students. What's the penalty in costs for all of your expenses, whether you're older or younger. Age 25 and older, average monthly expense across everything, $3,080 a month. Age 24 and younger, $1,935 a month. You can see the difference where we were in 19 with these two. This difference got wider. So older students paying more than they did 3 years ago. Another group that we look at specifically are students with dependents, not necessarily older, but maybe. Total cost per month, students with dependents $33.83, students without dependents $22.30. You can see where they were 3 years ago. This number actually got smaller. So maybe we're supporting or the cost structure of students with dependents did not inflate as much over the course of the last 3 years, but for some reason that number got slightly smaller. All right. Okay, finally, I'll leave you. Probably one of the most robust things that come from Sears is the open-ended responses, the qualitative responses, which we enjoy sifting through and reading. Some of them are humorous, some of them are heartbreaking, some of them are plain unfair. But some of these we kind of classified here to give you a sense of what students are feeling on FAFSA's assumptions of financial aid versus what the student reality is. It's difficult to qualify for financial aid because I have to put my parents' tax information, but they're not paying for any of my college education. So I'm having to pay out of my own pocket thousands of dollars every semester. Very frustrating because then my school schedule clashes with my work schedule. I can't afford to work less than 40 hours a week. So, I mean, in this case, the student's paying for it all, but they have to use their parents' income on FAFSA, which penalizes them. There is a major gap between people who can afford college and those who receive government aid, and I am in that gap. On the impacts of COVID, this was something we talked about in a prior meeting about this kind of pervasive perception of, well, the ROI in college is waning for me, right? Is college really worth it? Since the pandemic, the quality of my education and accessibility to my professors and on-campus resources has plummeted drastically. I'm seriously considering dropping out after 6 years of pursuing a bachelor's degree because school is ridiculously overpriced and not half as beneficial as it was. Perception, right? And I mean, this is California where unless, you know, if you're going to a public school, it's not necessarily ridiculously overpriced. It's expensive compared to other states in the US. California is fairly cheap, but the perception is it's ridiculously overpriced. And what is my ROI still here? Well, I'm going to it. That was a tough one to read. On the move to virtual learning being a good thing, virtual learning has been the best thing to happen for me as a student. I save an hour per day from not commuting that is applied at work. So they turned that opportunity into, I could, instead of paying more money, I can make more money. It's $300 per month in wages, not to mention additional costs associated with travel, with childcare. I'm not sure I'm successful without virtual. So, I mean, this is one of the good things that probably came from COVID is now we've got a more robust delivery for a certain group of students, where it might have been part of the piece together before. And the endless pervasiveness of the balance between school and work, very always in qualitative responses. I work full-time because if I didn't, I would be unable to afford basic living expenses. If I wanted to become strictly a full-time student, which is what we want, I would be broke because I'd receive no financial aid based upon my previous income. So I'm stuck trying to balance working full-time and going to school full-time. Because we know you try and do both of those, your graduation rate plummets. A lot of us are caught in a catch-22, need a job to cover tuition rent, but don't get assistance from grants. So we need to work, but we can't work more than 20 hours. So we have to pick up multiple jobs and then we fall behind in our schoolwork. Right. So good, you know, good qualitative responses that we get from students, and there's thousands of these. That's the word cloud of Sears. I could throw that up there. Kind of a fun thing to do, but you see the main responses in qualitative. Okay, so that's Sears. We will probably come out with, you know, a summary report on Sears here in fall. The student expense budget that we put up there are out on our website now in a nice PDF. They're being circulated and used by the campuses now. And the data files will be given back to segments and campuses for their subsequent use. Questions or comments?
Questions or comments? Yes.
Patrick, could you go back to the slide that showed, the respondent, breakdown?
The survey.
The survey, yeah.
Yep.
So wait a minute.
Response rates.
So how would I read that? It's not 3% of all respondents were community college.
No. This is of all the surveys we sent to existing community college students, 3% of them responded. This is not the distribution you can.
And what, do you know what that distribution is?
Not offhand, but we can get it. CCC is, we can get it.
Yeah, the volume of responses, I see the response rate is low, but the volume of responses is high because we have the survey so many. A lower response rate based on the last survey.
Got it. I guess that's, that's a big question to me as I'm looking at the finding around. Even though it was still 30%, you have a majority, over 60% of students in the survey saying, I've got enough to cover my expenses. That doesn't, I mean, yes, 30% is a lot, but I would think it would almost be the inverse based on even just the quotes that you pulled out, that a lot more students will find, college unaffordable. And I just keep thinking about what did that look like and who is it unaffordable for, right? Is it our community college students? How does that play into our programming and what we're doing here? So just trying to understand that.
Yeah.
Did you find that surprising? That
I mean, affordability as a perception, I mean, it could be that, okay, well, I have enough money to get through college because I took out a loan, so therefore it was affordable. I don't know. I mean, we could be hearing that from the students who are really trying to scrounge this out of their pockets, right?
or they're working.
Or or they're
I'm
working
working full-time, so
concurrently.
sure, technically I.
Right, but I mean, if you manage in your financial aid package, you get all the resources together, including loans or other sources of income, then technically, I guess maybe you could respond, okay, I can afford it, you know, there may be a later date where you can't afford to pay a loan off. Right, but currently, right now, okay, I'm okay. I don't know. This is just what the survey came out, and I mean, it wasn't skewed when the responses are weighted towards the entire student population. Many of them can't afford it. Right? And it's also weighted towards the size of the segments as well. So. it's
Well,
not-
70% of our student body is community college students, so I would assume that hopefully our survey falls along those representation.
If I could add
Sure.
if I can add to the discussion, take possible to look at taking into consideration the segment of students that are attending community college is saying, are they actually utilizing the other resources like the California Promise? So that's another resource that, another funding source that kind of offset some of those out-of-pocket expenses. So that could,
Right.
you know, that's. If you,
Yeah, if you're looking at 37% saying they can't afford tuition, well, community college.
Right.
Right, half the population is getting the promise grant. So at that point, okay, tuition is not a problem.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something else. That went.
So can you advance into the slide so we can look at those again to see like the responses for that segment of the students, if it's up here? Yes, well, that's a housing. Yeah, yeah, so in here. And that could possibly contribute to that 37% of, you know, of those saying that they kind of disagree, you know, with that. It's because, you know, they're utilizing another funding source to kind of offset that expense.
Or they got a college.
Mhm.
So Patrick, can you talk about some of our ideas about how we could drill down deeper into basic needs, which may be getting at what we're trying to understand, but from a different direction and not necessarily through the Sears.
Right. So when we did Sears in 1819, it was the first time we had done it in a long time. And we put in a bank of questions asking about basic needs. It wasn't our set of questions, it was basically a commonly used bank of questions to assess basic needs. And we got a lot of information off of that. When we did Sears this time around, the segments did not want to have those banks of questions in. We wanted to have a smaller, shorter survey, and I think segments themselves and campuses asked a lot of those questions as well. So there was concern about being duplicative of the survey being too long, so we took them out. We're gonna look at and see, are there ways of us surveying students who just fill out a FAFSA data and maybe gleaning some of that information directly from them in the process of processing Pell Grant or something like that. We need to come up with our own survey plan, whether we want to have Sears be more frequently, whether we collect basic needs information on the side, a separate survey, smaller, shorter survey, or in concert with the segments. I know we spoke with some folks at CSU Long Beach who do this survey on behalf of the CSU. And, you know, hopefully adopt something new that we could use based upon what you're already doing, so that we're not. But those were some of the best and most enlightening parts of the 1819 survey that are not in this. But I think we want to consider getting.
And I'm gonna put a plug in for the difference between the Student Aid Commission overseeing such a survey that looks at basic needs and how those needs change, especially in a state like California, that the purpose might be different than, say, CSU, which you're taking a deeper look at CSU students in particular, or UC students in particular. We'd be looking at college students as a whole, college students who are on financial aid. How are they managing with their basic living expenses? And to me, that's a valuable set of data that will help inform statewide policymakers to understand where there are some struggles. Whereas the segments probably use it to target their financial aid programs or to determine their cost of attendance and other resources that are specific to their students. Ours would be helpful for that policy or research perspective that wouldn't exist, across the board for all segments.
Felt like, the student aid commission, you did a fantastic survey during COVID of student need, where I think a lot of those questions that get at total cost, right? Do you feel like in 6 months you're gonna be able to afford, stay enrolled, or, just these broader questions, because you're right, to your point. Yes, my tuition, my fee schedule is affordable if I'm just looking, if I get a promise grant, I'm just looking at face value at community college fees. But when I factor in everything else, right, it becomes quite unaffordable. And when I recognize that my time to degree is 6 years here, it's exponential. So I just wonder, I would love to see some of the questions that you've already put out there to students wrapped into this year's, because I thought that was really your survey during COVID.
Yeah, we did 2 COVID, had over 100,000 responses.
Yeah, and that's just from financial aid students. So the key would be, and I can completely understand that from the perspective of segments, that we not over survey students.
Right.
And so that's going to be the key for us to coordinate, to make sure that there's not a lot of duplication, but that we find this space for these different types of surveys. And I would argue that the survey we do is different, but that we do need to coordinate it, because the last thing we want to do is overburden students with surveys.
But we kind of do have a natural survey capture point, because right at the moment they fill out a FAFSA, we get that record that is current, fresh data on how to contact the student. And, it's an opportunity to glean info and also introduce them to, okay, and now you're being processed at Csac for a Calfresh too. And, get the two-way information.
Okay, question. So for my clarification. So we're serving the students who are part of the segment already. What happens to those who are not? So meaning, how do we know that those that are not in the system right now have we're addressing their financial needs? Is there anyone?
In this case, as far as theaters goes, no, you're only asking students who are already in college how much of their costs while they are in college. We're not asking high school students who have yet to go to college. That would be a separate domain to survey.
So I'm thinking of the students who dropped out from the.
Yeah. Harder to get there. If they didn't fill out a FAFSA, I have no current contact with them. And the further they get away from dropping out of college, the college doesn't have a good contact with them. That would be a question for the folks at campuses who are like, okay, what are you doing to try and get folks back? And how do you contact students who are now 2 years removed?
I think to add to the, like when you said, what's the term, what terms affordable, right? And you obviously this with our students, I'd love to hear your perspective on this. I'm helping a student that's homeless, living in a hotel, in Hemet, and she's going to Cal State San Marcos, so we just moved her in almost 2 weeks ago. And she is terrified and almost didn't go because she was going to have to only take out about $3,000 to live on campus. Instead of like trying to find a way, literally some of these students that they're going to commute from, or 30 minutes away on the bus. So when I see more students living at home, it worries me that they don't realize if you do the math. So I literally sat down with mom and said, look, a bus pass plus time plus this is more than $300 a month. $3,000 is all she needed in loans to finish it all, wrap it all up, and be 10 months on campus. And it was like, okay, so if you want, take it, and because it's going to cost you more than that. If she stays here, you're in a hotel right now. So it was just, even though they're living in a hotel with no kitchen, they're homeless. They're living in a hotel with microwave, snack foods. They were still terrified with 3,000, like that math piece. And I think I'm hearing more and more of that. But I think they're spending more money commuting them on campus. But I don't know how, I mean, how do you tell a family, take out a loan, because it's like this message, you don't do it, don't do it. So I don't know, I'd like to put you on the spot, but I'd like to, I'm sure you're hearing those perspectives on how do we get in front of it. My worry is now we have, I hope, another few 100,000 students invading their FAFSA in a few weeks. How do we get ahead of that, or what are your thoughts? And I'm sure you're seeing that, like, you want to come out, they're gonna buy a car, but they haven't bought a car yet. I'm like, that's gonna cost more than the dorms, like, the car payment insurance right now.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of that perspective, like I mentored students and like they were worried about the $2,000 and it's like it'd be more expensive if you were to not take out the loan, because if you think about it, like sense of belonging, internships, that community bonding on campus is in addition to the other expenses, like it's gonna build on top of it, and so making a short-term investment is gonna make more sense in the long term. And so like what you were saying about contacting the parents and things like that and sharing your perspective is like, well, if you do that, then you have to do a car, then it's a car payment, and that's insurance, and then like kind of just showing them that perspective and showing them that it's a low risk to take on a loan and like pursuing other expenses.
The thoughts, yes.
A couple of thoughts. The cost of housing is a compelling issue. And I would actually add Santa Clara County, I'll pull you down the highway just a little bit to add it to your high end. And that's just gonna get worse. I would say that is an extraordinary issue for us in California. It is game changing. It makes us different from almost any place in the United States, certainly any place I've ever lived. So this nut that sits right in the middle of trying to afford college, it's an absolute game changer if you're in, if you're a student at San Jose State, San Francisco State, but even throughout California, it is game changing the cost of attendance. So that's one piece that I think is really compelling data that is valuable for us to understand. The other piece I would add is when we sort of talk about this idea of value and return on investment. This financial literacy question is not going away. It's in the background that we'll talk to people, and it's hard, right? It's not just like this and everybody gets it. It's deep rooted and it's tough to move people from for very good reason. It's tough for a reason. But if college is going to be something that we're going to have more people who have a financial strategy to be able to pay for in the state of California, and as somebody in other places, I would say everybody looks at California as being less expensive than every other place, housing notwithstanding. This is one of the issues we really gotta think about. And I know we deal with it in our programming, but I know I'm thinking about on campuses, helping people understand exactly the kind of questions that you're talking about. Not to tell people what to do, but to help people understand the options. This is complicated stuff. And even if you went to college, it's different now. The amount that people are paying relative to incomes, we could go, things that everybody knows. It's a different conversation. It's not about being frugal. And so we're going to have to figure out how to engage that discussion in addition to, I think, interrogating this idea that everybody should go for free. And that's the other challenge that we have, because that's the existential piece in people's mind that I think we've got to just wrestle with people. And I mean, with love and with care, but to help people understand here are maybe a couple of ways that you might be able to negotiate this. And I think this data, I'm very appreciative of it, let's begin thinking about that. Just to think about how we do it. There's no easy answer, but I do think it's something that we're going to have to tackle as Csac, as institutions, at the secondary, as well as the post-secondary. Because if people start understanding this, we're going to really struggle with people being able to negotiate some of these challenges that are not going away anytime soon.
And there is no such high rent district L supplement.
Right. So can I ask a question to your question about financial literacy? That's obviously been a key topic. And I think the struggle has been around how do you teach it? Where do you teach it? And I'm just wondering if the higher ed systems have given serious thought to building it into freshman curriculum in any kind of consistent way, or is it just sort of it's offered depending on where you go to college? There might be one-off opportunities, but has there ever been a conversation about this being a formal part of any kind of post-secondary education experience?
So I heard a couple of questions in there. One was, are people thinking about that? You better believe it. They absolutely are. Comprehensively, a singular strategy. I think that's where the decentralized nature of higher education becomes really tough. But it is one of the most significant issues that we're seeing. And there's a lot more institutions, I'll speak for the people I'm in touch with, almost all of the segments are absolutely thinking about where can this show up differently than it's showing up right now. We have an enormous responsibility with regard to this issue. And by the time we have people in their second and third year, I won't say it's too late, but we missed an opportunity. But I think it has to even start before that, because people still believe that I come to college and it's 1960 master plan. I'm going to be able to work down at the soda shop and pay for college. That's not. We're not even close to those realities. But in people's mind, that's where we are. It's very tough to take out that or if that's scary for very serious and good reason based on what you've experienced as a family. Why should you believe that that's a good investment? I think we have to start earlier talking to students, but also talking to families, again, with courtesy and respect around it. So taking that, given where I work, I would say we do have a different kind of responsibility at the institutional level to start figuring out how we can get this information in front of students and families earlier. And I would love it if it could be comprehensive. It would probably make us more successful.
If I may, Chair, I'm sorry, if I can add just to, again, another one of those moments. I'm wondering if it's possible that this can be added to our workshops, like our Cash for College workshops, maybe have it be like an additional piece. And we can incorporate like some of our partners, we have community-based organizations that are already doing it. We can look at some of our financial institutions, maybe some of the credit unions that are associated with some of the institutions as well. Because we just have to identify, I think if we possibly identify the partners that are kind of already doing that, we can possibly bring them in and we can vet them, just like with some of the, I think it was something similar that we did with some of the grants that we had for some of the K through 12, like with the college savings plan, those initiatives that we brought on like a few years ago. If that's something that we can do, because I think there is, it's very important to add that piece to it as well. Like you said, it's really like about it's about the parents, having the parents understand, not just like sending my kid to college, but how do I afford it, right? Outside of the financial, how do I tackle that financial gap? So I apply for my financial aid, and now there is a gap for me to meet that, like that sticker shock, right? So how do I educate myself? How do I educate my family? How do I educate the student?
I was just gonna add that I don't know how I ended up with this in my little folder I brought up here. But in November of 2019, I must have been speaking to someone, and the title of my topic was Financial Aid Begins in Kindergarten. And I went on to talk about how each year it could be built more and more into financial aid, and not just talking with, you always ask a little kindergarten child, what do you want to be when you grow up, kind of thing. But in talking with their parents, all through elementary, and I know Csac does part of that, and they've had some scripted programs that they do in 6th grade and everything, but really getting it to the families, like has been said, that we've got to get the families on board earlier, because it takes time to save, because you put in 1,000 and then you need it in a couple of months. So now it's really 700 or 500, or the whole 1,000 is gone. And so how do we get them to understand that this is not a last minute at graduation? Now that I've financed prom, now I have to look at these admission things that, okay, I have to secure the dorm and I have to have a deposit. I don't have that because I just spent this money here. And just having these conversations earlier and more often, not just early, one time, one and done, but more and more often, get parents to ask those questions, to not push loans, but do like Carolina even mentioned. I sat and I did a comparison. And how, and is it time consuming? Very time consuming. And who does it? I don't want to say who, because then it's like, okay, now these are the people that have to do it. It's everyone's responsibility if we're all in this together, that we get good wording, same message across the board kind of thing, but really to get it out there often, but earlier. Other comments, concerns? We know where we have to go with this. How do we get there becomes the question. I think we shared some great ideas and strategies, and it's just us putting pen to paper, getting some things down on where we will kind of shift, not throw out everything by any means, but just shift and build upon what we have. Be sure this survey is a good start for us on getting the information that we need on what we need to do. Other comments? Steve, you look like you want to say something online. I'm not sure, just listening intently. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Any other comments from anyone? Yeah.
I guess a comment was from the students that I mentored who would be the first in their family to go to college or who are undocumented. I had to like go over the financial aid, like their package with them and their families, because they didn't understand it at all. They didn't know the difference between like why they were qualifying for the grants and things like that, and unsubsidized loans or the subsidized loan, and I had to like really work with them. And they're like, why don't I just go to community college? Why don't I just like not go to college at all, or just take a break and all things like that? And so I really had to sit with them and kind of convince them to go, because it was their dream school and they got in, but then they're like, well, what's the next step? Like, how do I do this? And so the financial literacy and like getting the parents involved are really important.
That's where that summer melt comes down. We get them and we celebrate in May and June, and then all of a sudden nothing happens over the summer. And how I know in San Diego with Cal Soap, I have worked with the community colleges also. The outreach people, so that at the different segments, different campuses, so that they will reach for those kids. So we're handing off that high school child to you. And here's the next hand that will grab you and bring you in and show you the steps at the community college to keep you going. And they've done a lot of work in the summer. And I know up and down the state, it's a lot of work in the summer just to make sure that students are not just putting these award letters aside and doing nothing. And in getting that job that they will be kind of stuck in for a while, because then they don't go right away. I don't know where this idea came that those that should be going right on into college decide to take a gap year or two or half the life or whatever. How do we get them out of that mindset that they can go right now, and this is how we do it?
And I'm just highlighting, like people were saying, it can't just be the educators. And we all have the story, so that same story that someone sat me down and talked to me, tell me, it's okay, Kelly, you can take out the loan. That was my attitude. I was lucky that I wasn't I was part of this push for FAFSA and California Dream Act brought is like attention to those students that are in specialized programs that think that help. But I think the more we start stepping and that they can't just put a hand in the people on.
Right.
And how do we more people like I'm listening to counselors like you want to train, anyone wants to listen about this. And we have to get our minds out of that and all on this, because the need is going to be great. And you can't buy what you just did for the students. You can't buy it in the book and on demand webinar. It's not the same as that. There's just some things that needed you, and they trusted you. They trusted your experience. They trusted your research, and you build a relationship. That doesn't matter what we build or what we buy curriculum wise. So we need more human capital, more people, and we can't just rely on ourselves. I don't know what that looks like and how I can little by little with train the trainers and all that. We've all been trying to do that, but really embracing that. Why are we teaching more individuals or people who want to participate and join us to be able to have this conversation?
We've kept it a secret too long.
Yes, there you go. Like, why would the people even?
And if I may, if I could just add again to that too, what I found is a lot of times the conversation, it's really, like you said, it's that relationship with the person that you have across from you. It is the person that is at your church, right? Because that is in your community. So you feel safe talking to that person. So it's like you said, we have to go and uncover those rocks. We have to find those members in our community that are presently doing the work right now. And we have to bring them to the table. So all of the stakeholders that are in this fight, in this game with us, we have to make it more inclusive for all of them. We have to identify the gaps of where those people are. I know we have a lot of different agencies and people, that are assigned, geographically, but now we have to find out where those gaps are. And now we have to close those gaps and bring those people that are in the streets that know who those students are. So, at the school, so like when that student that is taking that online class, right? So now that person is not responding and they have no grade at the end of the quarter or the semester, there's somebody that knows what that student is, right? So now we have to go and identify, and we have to go back and bring those students back into the fold and have that conversation with them. We have to meet them where they are, and we have to give them the individual help that they need, right? Because it's like a one-to-one relationship. So every student, whatever school they're going to, whatever family, whatever race, economic, all that stuff, that relationship is one-on-one. And that person sitting across from the table with you, they have to be able to trust you, right? And know that you have their best interest at heart. So I just want to add that piece. So we have to identify those partners, those stakeholders that are presently doing the work with these students. And we know who and where they are. We just have to identify that other person that can make the connection to the student.
Yeah, I know that when you say get all of these stakeholders, I personally have asked the custodian at the high school where he used to work, because he is the girls softball coach at the school. I said, this year you're going to be trained on FAFSA. He said, what? I said, yes, because you have a relationship with these young ladies and you keep sending them to the counselor when you have them more time than the counselor would have. So I said, I don't know how we're going to get you paid for work, but you're going to go to the workshop that CalSOAP has planned, because, there's a day for the registrars, there's a day for the counselors, and and it's not just counselors, that's what the title is, but it's not just counselors, it's anyone who is interested. So I have convinced him that he is going to go and be trained. At least he can answer some of the questions. He may not become an expert, but he can answer some of the questions instead of telling these young ladies, go to the counselor, because he also has a relationship with their families, where the counselor may or may not. So I'm plucking them in San Diego. I'm telling you, they are real tired of me right now. And they keep saying, I thought you were out of town. I said I was, but it's Zoom. I zoomed into the meeting, and I even got somebody out of their COVID bed and said, okay, I keep emailing you and you have not responded. Have you connected with this person and that person? Because I know that we can make a difference. We can improve. Wherever we work, we can improve. And if we don't, it's just going to be a tragedy, because I can see the opt-outs happening. And there should be a chain of how do you opt out? And I've asked for that. I said, I've asked the superintendent to ask his principals, what is your opt-out plan? Are you just gonna let the counselor sign off? Are you going to have a conversation with the family and that student as to why? And then you sign off, because the bottom line is, when your school gets a report that you had 4 people fill out FAFSA or DREAM Act and the rest of them opted out, you're gonna have to answer to why they did that. And that's why I needed those dollars. How many dollars are left on the table? So, to drive this, to get it clearer. I said, all of you in these different titles at this district all went to college. How did you go? If we really sit and listen to your story, how did you go? Maybe you were on the Pell Grant too. I don't know. But don't think because you are here that you can't reach back and be a support to the students that are coming behind you that will be taking your jobs in a few more years. Because you will retire like I have, not really, but on paper, it's retired. It's a soft retirement. Other comments, because this has really stirred up a lot of conversation, great conversation, a lot of food for thought. A lot of additional agenda items, yes.
Very quickly, I will say, we should also keep in mind that part of what's happening with financial aid and understanding financial aid is we have a very tenuous middle class. So as we have the conversation, we need to understand that if you're in certain places, if you make $1,000 over the bell, no, that doesn't matter. Like that's negligible. So we have a middle class that means something different than it once did in terms of its relationship to college. And so we talk about that shock of, and even taking that loan, that's happening to a whole range of students who are seeing that and thinking, my gosh, this is how I can't believe it costs this much money, and a whole range of families. So I would just put that on the table that this dynamic that, and even for people who went to college are looking and they're surprised when it comes time and here's the bill and had no idea, and so I just want to add that as we think about who this is affecting. And the last thing I would say is, I think as we think about impact, and I agree with the one-on-one, there is nothing like there's nothing that compares to it. I will say also that there is a hearts and minds piece of this that if we're going to sort of move the needle, you also need to think about that happens concurrently, and that's easy to sort of say and put out there, but if some of what we will have to begin thinking about is what is the language that we use? How do we use the language when we're talking about going to college? All of those things are impacting how people create impressions of an expectation relative to the cost of their education. So we need to think about that. And then if we're looking for a particular end, consider how do we move the needle relative to the great social media that we're already doing, but also thinking about, are there some other elements that we need to add to that? If there are different things that we're wanting people to understand and believe about paying for college. So I just want to add that piece, because I think if we want to reach this generation, it's not going to be listening to me. It's going to be those things that we add to that are communicating. And there is nobody better to do that than other students and other families. And because people will listen to other students and other families as they should, in ways that they will not listen to anybody else.
Okay. Yes.
One last thing, my school at Santa Clara has a Thriving Neighbors program where we match first gen undocumented Santa Clara students to high school students who would be first gen or undocumented in high priority schools in the Bay Area. And so we mentor them for about a year and then they can reapply if they want to. But the college students get a stipend so they can afford their college. And then at the end of the program, the students get a certificate and then either like a laptop or a stipend. If they can do the program and do, the required trainings and attend all the meetings which are meant for. So that's one affordable way to kind of have that social capital and that one-on-one contact. And things like that. And so having my students be able to text me when they're filling out their FAFSA or things like that was really vital for their success.
And how many high school students were you able to reach out to?
Those are about 20 students in the program, and then we have like 10 credit students. But we're thinking of expanding upward and things like that.
All right, let's move on. Thank you so much for that rich discussion. Our last item that is informational, next to the last one, is the IES Grant Research Partnership and Student Supports the role of social safety net programs in the community college student success. It's informational, and we will hear from Patrick Perry as well as Jennifer Hogue.
Jennifer and Carla, are you there?
Yes, we're here.
Okay, great. Thanks for sticking with us. Okay, so Csac does many data and research partnerships with entities. One such is that with the California Policy Lab at UC Berkeley. And we've done a lot of successful projects with them. They have come to be the specialists in the space of student safety net programs. and they live in the space of financial aid, student safety net programs, college enrollments. And at the core of what they're going to be talking about here today is a data project where they've accumulated 15 years worth of data from Csac, California Community College Chancellor's Office of Community College Enrollments, and California Department of Social Services. It can be a very powerful database of three things to measure social safety net program participation, higher education enrollment, and financial aid receipt in California. The project, known as the Student Supports Project, has recently received an IDS Education Research Grant, which is pretty prestigious. And here today, I have Jennifer Hogue and also Carla Palos. We're going to talk about some of the data and work that's been done to date, but also talk about what are we going to do with this IDS grant, what are the things that are going to come of it, what is the research project, and what are we likely to be enlightened about here as the project moves forward. So I'll turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Great, thank you, Patrick. Would it be helpful? Should I share my screen?
Yes, please.
Okay, great.
Are they able to share screen?
Yeah.
There we go.
Yes,
Got it.
great. And let me just adjust this really quick. All right. Great. Thank you so much for that introduction, Patrick. And thank you for inviting us to join today. I'm Jennifer Hogue. I'm a research manager at the California Policy Lab, and I'm joined by my colleague, Carla Palos. And for those of you who aren't familiar with the California Policy Lab, we're a research institute based at the University of California. Carla and I are both based at our UC Berkeley site. And we operate by forming collaborative relationships between California government agencies and the UCs to harness the power of administrative data and generate research that improves public policy, ultimately to improve the lives of Californians. So one of those relationships, of course, is our relationship with Csac. We've been working with Csac for the last few years, again, on this project, Student Supports, the role of social safety net programs in college student success. And as Patrick mentioned, we were recently awarded an Institute for Education Sciences, or IES grant, for this work. And so we thought this would be a good opportunity to share a little bit more about this study, what we've discovered so far, and what's to come. So I'll start with the motivation for this project, which is that, as we know, many college students struggle to meet their basic needs, potentially interfering with their ability to focus on school. And many of these students are eligible for safety net programs, but data limitations make it challenging to understand the magnitude of participation, gaps in participation, and then using that data to target outreach. And in particular, Calfresh enrollment rates among college and graduate students have historically been difficult to estimate. So we've partnered with Csac, CDSS, University of California Office of the President, and the California Community College Chancellor's Office to create a linked database on with financial aid data, Calfresh participation from CDSS, and college enrollment, as well as some outcome variables. And this database is currently comprised of 11 years of data, but we're aiming for up to 15 years going through 2025. Includes millions of linked individual level administrative records. And as Ryan, who I can see is on the call, can attest, this is kind of a complex process. We do this without seeing any personally identifiable information, using a privacy preserving algorithm. So that allows us to link individuals without seeing any of their information. So I also wanted to note that currently our project is focused on Calfresh, but we're planning to expand to other safety net programs in the future. So focusing in on our current scope of work, the goals of this project are to calculate Calfresh participation broken out by campus, region, and student characteristics, to simulate Calfresh eligibility, to examine variation in take-up rates among students, to measure the impact of Calfresh participation on student educational outcomes, and also to inform outreach strategies and help identify high-need populations, and evaluating interventions to learn a little bit more about what works in connecting eligible students to these programs, in Calfresh in particular. So this slide, I'm going to provide a timeline of these different aspects of the project, just to give you a little bit of a better sense. So last year in 2021, we established this data linkage from 2010 through 2020 between the 4 data contributors. Earlier this year, we used this linkage to calculate the percentage of UC and community college students who are currently participating in Calfresh, broken out by campus, region, and student characteristics. Currently, and hopefully culminating in spring of 2023, we are working on estimating the share of students who are eligible for Calfresh. And this will really help us contextualize our participation rates. Because right now, if you are able to say 10% of students on a particular campus are participating in Calfresh, it's more helpful to know what percent out of those who are eligible are participating in Calfresh. So our next phase of work will allow us to do that. Importantly, a major element of our study is understanding the impact of participating in Calfresh on educational outcomes. If having access to these benefits improves students' outcomes like grade point average, on-time completion, graduation or completion. And we're going to use a propensity score design, comparing students who are eligible for Calfresh but not participating in the program to those who are eligible and participating, so that we have 2 roughly comparable groups. And finally, as part of this project, we're working with our government partners and campus partners to identify promising Calfresh outreach strategies and evaluate their impact on applications and enrollment. And we're doing this type of work throughout the project, but kind of ramping this up next year. I also wanted to highlight, as Patrick mentioned, this summer, we were awarded a grant from the Institute of Educational Sciences in the Federal Department of Education, which was an exciting and important development. It indicates federal support for better understanding the role of the safety net in supporting college students' basic needs. And it'll also help us to continue and deepen this work, particularly leaving open the possibility of more evaluations to help us understand what works and connecting students who are eligible to these benefits, and then potentially expanding this inquiry beyond food and security to other basic needs. And the other thing I wanted to mention is that for the rest of our presentation today, we wanted to share some of our early findings, particularly our participation rates and the results of one of those evaluations I mentioned, which we did in partnership with Csac, called the Zero EFC experiment. But before I go on, does anyone have any questions about the project overview or anything I've presented so far? Great, okay. So moving on to starting with participation rates. So this slide shows Calfresh enrollment rates among college students for the decade spanning from 2010 to 2020. And we can see that it was relatively steady for community college students in the blue. And rates of Calfresh enrollment among UC students really increased from 2016 onwards for all campuses. And that was especially pronounced at a couple of campuses, namely Merced and Santa Barbara, and also among graduate students at UCSF. So on this right-hand side of this slide, you can see the Calfresh participation rate out of all students in these categories for community college students, UC undergrads, and UC grad students. And we break these down by a lot of different characteristics. So I'll just highlight today by financial aid status. So this slide shows the breakdown, the participation rate among community college students by financial aid status. So we see that students who filed FAFSAs were significantly more likely to enroll in Calfresh than those who didn't. So you can see in the blue, that's the overall community college Calfresh enrollment rate. And then moving down, you see the by financial aid status. So FAFSA filers, it was about 17% compared to 10% overall. And we also see that the recipients of Cal Grants and Pell Grants were at 2 times the rate of the overall undergraduate population. And looking next at the UCs, we see a similar theme with greater participation among those participating in our Cal Grant recipients and Pell Grant recipients, as well as from those who filed FAFSAs. And this is broken down by undergrads and graduate students. And if you are interested to explore Calfresh participation rates in more detail, you can download our report. We also have interactive tables on our website. And with that, I will, unless there are any questions, pass it off to my colleague, Carla.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you. So before I start talking about the Zero EFC experiments, I'm just gonna give a brief overview or recap of this. So as some of you might know, as of January 2021, the eligibility for Calfresh was temporarily expanded to include students with an expected family contribution of 0 or who were eligible for work study, so long as they met the program's citizenship and income requirements. CPL and the People Lab assisted Csac and CDSS with the design and evaluation of 2 outreach experiments to encourage Calfresh application and enrollment among this group of students. So as part of this outreach effort, Csac sent emails to roughly 285,000 students in February 2021, and again in June 2021 with some postcards. The first experiment, which focused on the February notifications, tested the variation in timing of the email notifications on application and enrollment. And the second experiment, which focused on the June notifications, tested the modality of the notifications on applications. Next slide. So for the results for the first experiment, we found that 2 to 3% of the students who received an email applied within 1 week, with more applications rolling in shortly after. And this increase in application also translated in an increase in enrollment from 1.5 to 2.5 percentage points. Additionally, due to a small implementation error in how the emails were sent out, some students received 2 emails while some students received no email at all. And this offers us a unique opportunity to evaluate how non-notifications versus multiple notifications look in application and enrollment. And we found that the effects in application and enrollment to be even more significant for students who unintentionally received the 2 emails. Next slide. So this chart shows an increase in application, shows how the increase in application led to an increase in Calfresh enrollment among the treated students. So in here we broke down the notifications by 4 different groups. So the group of students who received 2 notifications, no notification at all, 1 notification on February, and then 1 notification on March. And as you can see, the 2 notification group is larger than the rest in now 3 months. Next slide. Thank you. So for the experiment 2, its students were randomly assigned to receive 1 of 4 emails. The original message, there was a simplified version of that, a destigmatizing message, and then one that said you just had enough benefits. Half of this group received a postcard. And the key findings for this experiment were that simplifying the language of emails resulted in a small but statistically significant increase in applications. Additionally, destigmatizing language did not result in higher application rates compared to the regular email. But most potentially surprising or notable finding was that an email accompanied by a postcard made a large significant difference in application rates. Next slide. So to summarize these 2 experiments, we can zoom out, and the key takeaways between the 2 of them were that emails are low touch, low cost intervention that have small but positive impact on Calfresh application and enrollment. And from the second experiment, we noticed that email notification appear to be more impactful when the message is simplified, when they're paired with postcards. And as we saw by that unintentional accident of sending students multiple emails, that sending multiple emails is also proves effective. That was a lot of information. So are there any thoughts or questions about that?
Questions? Comments? Yes.
Thank you so much. I have tons, but I'll probably just have to ask Patrick after. I will be here all night. Just one question in terms of the email notifications, was it mass all students? Was it certain students based like a Pell Grant? Like how did we target that? I'm sorry if I missed that part. And then I'm wondering, and this is a bigger question, if there's any correlation between not all campuses accept even Calfresh benefits or EBT on campus. So I'm wondering if there's any correlation between who accepts it to the number of students that were eligible. If that's something I'm thinking about, you see it, you can actually use it on campus, or I can maybe apply. So I don't know, just wondering, I know it's 2 parts. So for this one, was there something specific targeted, like a specific group that we did a email to, or the number section?
So for the first question, we focus on just students who had filed a FAFSA, who had this expected family contribution of 0. I'm not sure we did any other kind of breakdown. Jennifer, I don't know if you have.
Yeah. What Carla said, these experiments just applied to the students who had 0 EFC on their FAFSA. And so that was, an additional way that students could qualify for Calfresh and be exempt based on the student rule. So these emails went out to all of those students who reported 0 EFC. And we haven't done subgroup analysis on these experiment results yet. But we do see with our participation rates analysis that Calfresh participation varies widely from school to school and region to region, which could be due in part to outreach efforts, or as you mentioned, if you can use them on your campus, or just differences in the student body makeup.
Yeah, I have a question. I don't know if you can hear me, there's no microphones around. Okay, so we know you have your mailing address to send a postcard, you have their email address to send emails. Did you consider doing text messages at all? Everybody wants a phone. Or did you just couldn't think that was worth the effort to try text messages?
That's a good question. I know that the implementation of these experiments was done. I know there was a lot of conversation between CPL staff and also Csac staff and staff from CDSS. And the actual implementation of the experiments predates both of our times at CPL. So it's possible that was part of the conversation. I do know that we are planning as part of this project, we're currently in conversation with other researchers who are doing more of a text message based approach. So as part of our overall project, we should have more to say on the effectiveness of text messaging, hopefully soon.
Other comments, questions? Yes.
With so I'm looking on the website because I was curious about what the email looked like, the simplified versus a longer version. To the point about text messaging, has your group considered using the California logo as part of the letterhead? And the reason why I say that is because people are probably more likely to recognize that logo versus the Calfresh versus the Csac logo. So I'm wondering if they thought that this was spam.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's good to consider. I know that the emails came from Csac, but that's good always to keep in mind to try to minimize the chances that this will be either sent to spam or seen as spam. So keep that in mind for future experiments.
The incremental little experiments you can try to see, okay, does that bump it up, right? Does a message from Gavin bump it up, right?
Yes.
I was even thinking a message that I could tailor to current seniors now. Like, why are we waiting before they graduate? If we could tailor a message now that goes to current seniors before they leave. Obviously, there's a whole layer there, but you have to probably get through the county, but even just that stronger handoff. We don't give them anything, and I think it's gonna get more complicated because now we're treating all California students, which is amazing. So also we think they get through lunch to differentiate, and that is gonna be, it's been a challenge already for us in K-12, how to make sure they do that form still, even though everyone gets fed, right? And so, I don't know, I just thinking proactively, those pieces of, it has such a big impact already. Just like, on a postcard, like, we're talking about.
Let them know that it's there.
Yeah, exactly.
Possibility.
If you're graduating in 30 days, you do all these other reminders.
Right, and you're still gonna be hungry.
And I,
So-
yeah, and I know you're gonna bring me lunch, and I know you're almost, I have a hill that I can tend to, nothing. But I think there's a science behind the way you wrote the email. Going back to it, what you were saying, like, there's a science to it, so I would hate to just grab something that I think, I'd love to see what was said as well. Thank you.
Other comments?
Jennifer, did you have more slides?
Just a conclusion slide. I know we're well over time, but just to conclude, what Carla presented was one example of that last goal of this project, the co-piloting interventions. We now have, we can do a lot more of those. So if anyone has any ideas or would like to co-pilot something, we're definitely open to that. And as I mentioned, we're currently working on the eligibility simulations and impact analysis, and we'll share that with you all when they're available. But in the meantime, don't hesitate to reach out if you have questions about the study. I have my email there on the slide.
Yeah, on the eligibility simulations on this one, I think one of the goals would be with the data that we get from a FAFSA or a CADA, can we simulate from what we get off of that, who is highly likely to also be eligible for Calfresh or other safety net programs, and then immediately push, right? Hey, we think you're also eligible for this. Code for America has now built this nice layer on top of this to try and help make the process of applying easier. What can we do in that arena? And then the other things as part of the study. Okay, what's the impact of Calfresh? Right, for the exact same like student who did or didn't get Calfresh, change in graduation or change in college going rate, change in term persistence, change in GPA. All things that we can do with the status set, or that they can do with the status set that I think are going to be, this is going to be a really robust piece that we have here in California, and things that we can experiment with that clearly the federal government is interested in not to fund it, which is a real boon for all of us. So thank you.
Thank you so very much.
Yeah.
For attendance.
Thank you for inviting us.
Yeah, thank you for your time.
Okay, our last item is new business to be considered at future meetings. Is there anything that we need to think about, like to have for future meetings? So 3 items, we have had a lot of discussion. It's been wonderful, though.
That's good.
It's very good.
Is
Here-
it?
Okay, here we go. All right. I knew it.
You know, just, I think maybe exploring or identifying some of our community partners, right? And this goes back to our robust discussion about the outreach. I believe it was it 6 or was it 5 that we really, no. Our extensive discussions, I'm gonna look at my notes, so I think it was 6. So can we identify some of those folks that are presently doing the work and bring a few of them, different aspects, right? Maybe say someone from the financial institutions, right? Some that are out there doing financial literacy, maybe like a community-based organization. We can identify maybe 2 or 3 different segments of organizations that are doing that financial literacy piece and bring them in to kind of present, to kind of start our, to kind of get our brains going about how to address and tackle, this financial literacy piece of the discussion that we had. And it would just be informational, I think.
So exploring.
Can you help me, Mr. Perry, with that?
I can give you, I'm not to share which one now or not, but we started with financial literacy on our county and our website. There's so much resources there, we don't need to spend money. So many free resources
Right.
available. It's just being intentional and strategic, and always the teachers won't give me class, I must have tied in the standards, so I'm literally writing lesson plans on financial literacy that goes with Romeo and Juliet, because that's what we teach them. Like we have to, we can't just take class time to do those things. So definitely I could, I'll share with you a little bit, some examples, but I think how do we do it? We don't, there's so much out there already.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, we could totally, sometimes it's one of our initiatives because, and it's been a conversation because how do you support students? How do you think about funding college when you're working with student loans on hotel? How do you think about savings and financing and when there's implications, even social emotional implications, when talking to students. So we've had to navigate those conversations, but this is not even what they're used to. So definitely we could bring some of those, I'll share them with you, but I think even if it's just, what I've realized is, local control in K-12, I can't, all community work districts can't all, some of them are not gonna all be the same, but I can give them different options and they work within the system, right? So like, they use California colleges for financial aid and financial planning, they might use EverFi, another free platform for the elementary school students, because they have games. There's so much out there, so I can definitely bring those two as well, Karen. But yeah, I think it's like you said, so talking about more, how do we bring the other people to know about what's out there?
Yeah.
So that would work.
Would you guys agree? Do you think that's something that if we could, have some come in and present and we could kind of vet them just to kind of see, where do we begin with tackling this financial literacy piece?
Many of them are doing it. It's just us knowing who they are and where they operate, because they don't all operate in the same areas. Any other ideas for future meetings? Hearing none, seeing none. This has been a wonderful meeting and it is now adjourned.
Thank you.